Her father sold her to a stranger to pay off a gambling debt. She arrived at a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. And the man waiting for her had a scar running from his temple to his jaw and barely said 4 words. She thought she'd married a monster, but every morning before she woke, he filled her water bucket, lit her stove, and left wildflowers where she'd find them. He never said, "I love you." Not once. But what he laid on that table on their wedding day broke an entire town to tears. This story will teach you that love isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's built, one silent act of kindness at a time. You're listening to Cowboy Dusk, where the prairie sun sets on stories of rugged love, quiet heroes, and the kind of compassion that doesn't need words to be heard. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. If you want to feel what real love sounds like when it has no words, stay until the very last line. I promise it's worth it.
Clara counted 17 scars on the man's hands before she realized he was speaking. She could not hear him. The blood in her ears was louder than his voice. The wagon had stopped hard, throwing her forward against the bench seat, and the driver was already climbing down to untie her trunk from the back. He moved quick, like a man who wanted to be somewhere else. Anywhere else. She could not blame him. The Kansas prairie stretched flat and yellow in every direction, and the cabin that sat in the middle of it looked like something the land had tried to swallow and given up on. Across 30 feet of bare dirt yard stood a man, tall, still as a fence post. Hat in one hand, the other hanging loose at his side. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline, thick and pale against sun-darkened skin. He did not smile, did not wave, just stood there watching her with eyes she could not read in the failing light of a June evening. "Miss Clara." His voice carried flat across the distance, low and even, like he was calling a horse that spooked easy. She climbed down. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees and would not let them see it. The driver pulled away fast, wheels kicking dust that hung in the still air. She watched the wagon grow small on the road and felt something close to panic rise in her chest before she pushed it down deep where it belonged. When she turned back, the man had taken 4 steps forward. He stopped at 6 feet, like there was a line drawn in the dirt that only he could see. "Got a room ready. Supper is cold, but there is plenty." He turned toward the cabin, expected her to follow. She did, not because she trusted him, not because she wanted to, because her father's gambling debts and her father's signature on a contract she had never seen had brought her here, and there was nowhere else to go. That was not entirely true. In her pocket, folded small and worn soft at the creases, she carried a half-written letter addressed to Thomas Calloway in Independence, Missouri. Thomas with his kind hands and his bookbinding shop and his clean collars. Thomas who had courted her for 6 months, and whom she had turned away because she thought she deserved better than a poor man's wife. The irony of that decision sat in her stomach like a stone. She followed the scarred stranger into his cabin, her husband by contract, Elias Stone. She did not yet know that was not his real name. Inside, the cabin was clean. That surprised her. She had expected dirt floors and cobwebs, the bachelor squalor her father had lived in after her mother died. Instead, she found swept pine boards, clean linens on a bed pushed against the far wall, a lamp already burning on the table, and window glass polished without a single streak. Somebody had cleaned this place recently, carefully. Like they were expecting company they wanted to impress but did not know how. A rocking chair sat by the window, positioned exactly where the morning light would fall. On the table, a plate covered with a cloth. On the stove, a kettle still warm. And on the highest shelf, beside a worn Bible with a cracked spine, a small wooden box. Hand-carved, dark wood, brass latch. No key that she could see. Clara noticed it the way she noticed everything. Filed it away. Did not ask. Elias set her bag down inside the door. His movements were careful, like a man used to being watched and judged for how he handled things. He straightened up and looked at her for just a moment, then looked away. "I will be in the barn." You are safe here." Then he left. The door closed behind him, soft, not slammed. She heard his boots on the porch steps, then on the packed dirt, then nothing, just wind and the sound of her own breathing in a stranger's house. Clara stood in the middle of the cabin and pressed her hands together to keep them from shaking. She looked at the clean linens, the polished glass, the rocking chair placed just so. These were not the actions of a careless man. Someone had thought about her coming here, had prepared. She opened her leather satchel, the one she had refused to let the wagon driver touch. Inside, wrapped in a piece of her mother's old petticoat, was a set of drawing pencils. Faber No. 2s, still sharp, the cedar casing smooth from years of use. Her mother had given them to her on her 12th birthday, 3 months before the consumption took hold, and 2 years before it finished the job. These pencils were the only thing Clara owned that mattered. She had fought her father to keep them. He had wanted to sell them along with everything else to feed his debts. She had hidden them in her corset for the entire train ride west. She tucked them under the mattress now, out of sight. Then she pulled the Thomas letter from her pocket, unfolded it, read the words she had written, and crossed out and written again. "Dear Thomas, I owe you an honest explanation for what I did." That was as far as she had gotten. 6 months of trying, and she could not get past the first sentence, because the honest explanation was simple and ugly. She had turned him down because he was poor, and she was proud. And now she was poorer than he had ever been. Married to a man she had never met, standing in a cabin in Kansas with nothing to her name but pencils and shame. She folded the letter back into her pocket. Her escape route, still there, still open. Clara lay down on the bed. The quilt smelled like cedar and lye soap. The pillow was stuffed with clean straw, not feathers, but it was fresh. She stared at the ceiling boards, pine knotted close enough to touch if she sat up. She thought about Thomas. She thought about her 2 younger sisters back in Independence, left in the care of an aunt who did not want them. She thought about her father, who had signed her away like livestock to settle a debt she had not known existed until the day the contract arrived. She did not cry. Clara Marlowe did not cry. She kept score instead, and right now the world owed her plenty. Outside, the wind picked up. It pushed against the cabin walls and found its way under the door. She heard Elias's voice, low and steady, coming from somewhere near the barn, talking to his horse, she guessed. The way lonely men talk to animals. More words in 30 seconds than he had spoken to her since she arrived. Then a second voice answered. Clara went still. She held her breath and listened. The second voice was male, not Elias. Older, maybe, or just more urgent. The words were broken by wind, scattered across the yard in pieces she had to strain to catch. She heard Mercer. She heard October. She heard a sentence that came through whole, clear as a bell ringing in the dark. "Mercer will not wait past October, Elias. He wants that land." Elias's reply was too low to hear. The other man's horse stamped and blew, and then there were hoofbeats moving away, fading into the night. Clara lay still in the dark, listening to the stranger's stranger talk about land and deadlines, and a name she did not know. She had married a man with secrets. Then again, she had her own, tucked in her pocket, folded small enough to hide. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. Elias knew exactly what she thought when she saw the scar. Everyone thought the same thing. The worst part was, they were not entirely wrong. He lay in the barn loft with straw poking through his shirt, and his back aching the way it always did on cold nights, though this was June and not cold at all. His back ached because guilt weighed something, and 15 years of it had bent his spine in ways no doctor could fix. The bay mare shifted below him. The roan stamped once and settled. Familiar sounds. He knew every noise this barn made, every creak of timber, every rattle of the tin roof when the wind pushed hard. He had built this barn himself, board by board, the year he turned 22. Same year he built the cabin. Same year he started pretending to be someone he was not. His name was not Elias Stone. It was Elias Kane, and there was a warrant out of Abilene with that name on it. 15 years old, that warrant. faded ink and yellowed paper. But paper had a way of lasting longer than the men who signed it. He closed his eyes and saw what he always saw: Silas Brennan's face, the water trough, the blood spreading on the surface like oil. He had been 17, a boy, working the Brennan Ranch outside Abilene for 5 years by then, since the town placed him there after his parents died. Silas Brennan was a cattleman who believed that discipline and leather were the same word. He kept a horsewhip coiled on a hook by the barn door, and he used it the way other men used conversation, to make his point clear. 4 years of that whip across Elias's shoulders, his back, once across his face, which was how he got the scar that ran from temple to jaw, the one that made people whisper and look away and decide he was dangerous before he opened his mouth. On a September evening in 1868, a calf broke through fence. Brennan came out of the house with the whip already uncoiled, already swinging. He caught Elias across the ribs, then the shoulders. Then he drew back for the face again. Elias caught the whip, yanked it. Brennan stumbled forward and Elias shoved him, hard, harder than he meant to, harder than he needed to. Brennan's skull cracked against the stone edge of the water trough, and the old man went down like his strings were cut. Blood on the water, blood on the stone, blood on Elias's hands where the whip had torn his palms. And for 1/2 second, so brief he might have imagined it except that he had not imagined it, he felt satisfied. A flash of dark pleasure at seeing the man who had beaten him for 4 years lying still on the ground. That 1/2 second was what haunted him. Not the shove, not the blood, not the running, the satisfaction, the proof that something violent lived inside him and enjoyed what it could do. Brennan survived. Elias learned that years later, second-hand from a drifter passing through. Brennan survived but lost some of his mind, could not remember clearly, walked with a lean to the left. The county sheriff issued a warrant for Elias Kane on the charge of assault with intent to kill. Elias was already 200 miles west by then, working under a new name, building a new life from nothing. 15 years of nothing becoming something. 200 acres of good grassland, 60 head of cattle, a cabin, a barn, a garden that produced tomatoes and beans and squash, a natural spring on the North Hill that fed an underground aquifer worth more than all the rest, combined in country this dry. And on the highest shelf of his cabin, in a hand-carved box with a brass latch, the broken piece of horsewhip he had torn from Brennan's hand. 6 inches of braided leather, stiff with old blood that might have been Brennan's or might have been his own. He kept it as a reminder. You are capable of this. He took the box down some nights when the memories pressed too hard, opened it, looked at the whip fragment, closed it, put it back. A ritual of self-punishment that he could not explain and could not stop. Now there was a woman sleeping in his cabin. A woman who had looked at him when she stepped off that wagon with an expression he recognized because he had been seeing it from the entire town for 15 years. Not fear, contempt. Quickly masked, quickly hidden behind careful blankness, but he had caught it. The slight narrowing of her eyes, the way her mouth pressed thin when she looked at his threadbare shirt, his rough boots, the scar. She thought he was less than, just like everyone else. From everyone else, that look rolled off him like rain off tin. From her, it cut different. He did not know why yet. He rose before dawn, climbed down from the loft, splashed water on his face from the pump, and went inside the cabin quiet as he knew how. She was still sleeping. He could hear her breathing, slow and even, from behind the curtain he had hung across the room to give her privacy. He filled the water bucket from the well, set it inside the door, handle facing out so she could grab it easy. He laid out cornmeal, bacon wrapped in cloth, salt cellar, the cast iron skillet already warming on the stove. He stoked the fire, set the coffee pot on, and left before the water boiled. Before she woke, before she could see him standing in her space and feel crowded or watched or afraid. He went to the fence line and swung a hammer. Post after post, the rhythm steadying him the way it always did. the shock of iron on wood running up through his arms and settling the noise in his head. An hour later, he heard the cabin door open, smelled cornbread cooking. His stomach tightened, and it was not hunger. When she called him in, he washed at the basin, sat at the table, and ate with his eyes on his plate. The cornbread was good, better than good. Light inside, crisp on the edges, salted right. Cornbread is good, real good. He wanted to say more. Tell her the coffee was strong the way he liked it. Ask if she had slept all right. Ask if the bed was comfortable, if she needed another blanket, if the pillow was too flat. But every time he opened his mouth to speak, he saw Brennan's blood in the reflection of his coffee and went quiet. She cleared the dishes. He carried his plate to the basin. Got fencing needs mending. He left. 4 words. That was all he could manage. The door closed behind him, and he stood on the porch for a moment with his eyes shut, hating himself for his silence and knowing he could not break it. Silence was the wall he had built around the violence inside him. If he opened his mouth too wide, something might escape that he could not take back. The sound of hoofbeats brought him around. Will Carson came riding up the south trail on his dappled gray, hat pushed back, face red from the heat. Will was 63 years old, a former county clerk who had retired to 8 miles of grazing land east of Elias's property. He and his wife, Ruth, were the closest thing Elias had to friends. Will knew more about territorial law than most lawyers, and Ruth made cornbread that could bring a man to tears, though Elias would never tell Clara that. "Morning," Will said, swinging down from the saddle. He tied his horse to the fence rail and walked over, hands in his pockets, eyes on the cabin. "That your new bride in there?" "Yes, sir." Will looked at him sideways. "You tell her about Mercer yet?" "Nothing to tell." Will spat in the dirt. "There's plenty to tell, and you know it. Hank Mercer is buying up every parcel around your property, trying to control the water access. Your spring on the North Hill is the only year-round source in this whole valley, and with this drought shaping up the way it is, that water is worth more than gold." Elias said nothing. His hand tightened on the fence post. "He has offered you 3 times, Will continued. You turned him down 3 times. Now he is playing dirty. Word at the barber shop is he is pressuring the merchants to cut off your store credit, telling folks you are dangerous, not right in the head." And Carson lowered his voice. "I heard from a reliable source that he has hired a man to dig into your past, Elias. Somebody who asks questions for money. You understand what I'm saying?" Elias understood. His knuckles were white on the fence post. "You need to be careful," Will said. "Mercer is not a patient man, and he is not a kind one. His wife left him 2 years ago. His herd is over-leveraged at the bank. He is running on credit and bluster. And when that runs out, he will get mean." "Meaner," Elias corrected. Will nodded. "Meaner." He clapped Elias on the arm. "You got a good woman in there, I can tell by the way she climbed off that wagon. Spine straight, chin up. Do not run her off by being a mule." Will mounted up and rode out. Elias watched him go, then stood staring north. Toward the hill, toward the structure he had been building up there since March. 4 walls of good lumber, window openings cut wide, a work table inside, rough but level, no roof yet. The glass panes he had ordered from St. Louis had not arrived. He had started building it before he knew who Clara was, before he knew what she looked like or where she came from or what she needed. He only knew what it felt like to have no space that belonged to you, to live your whole life in other people's barns and on other people's land. And he had decided that whoever this woman turned out to be, she would have something that was hers alone. He did not know yet that she could draw, that she carried pencils hidden under the mattress like other women hid money. That discovery was still weeks away, and when it came, it would change everything. He turned back to the fence and swung the hammer. Behind him, in the cabin, he knew she was watching. He could feel her eyes on his back the way he could feel weather coming, and his hands, despite everything, were shaking. That evening after supper, after the dishes were done and the lamp turned low, Elias went to the barn. But he did not go to his usual sleeping spot in the loft. He went to the far end where his tools hung on the wall, and he pulled down the draw knife and a piece of pale ash wood he had been saving. He sat on an overturned bucket and began to shape the wood. Long, smooth pulls with the blade, shavings curling away and falling soft on the dirt floor. He was making a new rocker for the chair under the oak. Clara had sat in it that afternoon, and it had lurched, one leg shorter than the other from years of settling in the weather. He had seen her grab the armrests, seen the pulse in her throat jump. She had stood up fast and walked away, and she had not gone back to the chair. So now he was fixing it. Because it was the only chair his parents had ever owned, and because she deserved to sit in it without being afraid, and because he could not say any of this out loud. He could only shape wood and hope that somehow the meaning would carry through. The lamplight threw his shadow long on the barn wall. The draw knife rasped. Back and forth, back and forth. A steady rhythm that sounded, if you were lying in the cabin with your ears open, like a man building something he did not want you to see. Clara knew what it meant to be judged. In Independence, they judged her for her father's debts. In Stone Creek, they judged her for her husband's scar. At least in Independence, they had the decency to say it to her face. 2 weeks had passed since she arrived. 2 weeks of cornbread and silence and the steady tap of Elias's hammer on fence posts at dawn. 2 weeks of finding the water bucket filled every morning, the handle wrapped in some kind of leather that was smoother than it should have been. 2 weeks of watching a man who could talk gentle to a horse for 10 minutes straight, but could not say more than 4 words to his wife at supper. She was getting used to the rhythm of the place. Up before dawn, though never before Elias. Coffee on the stove, always hot, always waiting. The stove already fed, the bacon already laid out. He did these things like a ghost, slipping into the cabin while she slept and slipping out again, leaving only evidence of care and no explanation for it. She did not know what to make of him. He was nothing like Thomas, who had filled silences with easy talk and warm smiles and compliments that came so natural you forgot they were deliberate. Elias filled silences with filled water buckets and mended hinges and wildflowers left on the porch rail where she would find them. He spoke with his hands the way other men spoke with their mouths, and the language was foreign to her. On a Saturday morning in late June, Elias hitched the wagon. Need supplies from town. You are welcome to come or stay. Your choice. Clara climbed up beside him, not because she wanted to see Stone Creek, because she wanted to mail a letter to her sister Charlotte, the younger one, the one with their mother's eyes, who was 13 now and living with Aunt Margaret in Independence and probably miserable. Clara had written a short letter, careful, revealing nothing about her own situation, just asking how Charlotte was doing in school and whether Margaret was feeding them proper. In her other pocket, the Thomas letter sat like a warm coal. She had not decided yet. The ride took an hour and a half. They did not speak. The wagon creaked over dried ruts from last month's rain. Heat shimmered off the prairie. Flies buzzed around the horses' heads. Elias drove with his hands loose on the reins, his eyes on the road, his jaw set in that way she was learning meant he was bracing for something. People got ideas about me, he said. It was so sudden after the long silence that Clara startled. Most are not kind. They will stare. Whisper. You do not have to pay them any mind. Clara's hands tightened together in her lap. What kind of ideas? His jaw worked. The scar on his cheek pulled tight. That I am not right. Strange, dangerous maybe. He paused. Some might say things to you. About me. About us. Just want you prepared is all. She looked at his profile against the bright sky, the scar, the weathered lines around his eyes, the way he held himself, straight-backed and still, like a man walking through a room full of people who had already decided what he was. I can handle it, she said. They did not speak the rest of the way. Stone Creek appeared ahead. Single main street, buildings small and weathered. A mercantile, a bank, a church with a white steeple, a saloon at the far end. Elias pulled the wagon up in front of the mercantile and tied the horses. He came around to help Clara down. His hands touched her waist, brief and impersonal, and released the moment her feet hit dirt. The mercantile smelled like coffee beans and dry goods, barrels of flour by the door, bolts of fabric stacked on shelves, a fan turning lazy overhead doing nothing against the heat. Behind the counter, the store owner, a thin man named Garrett, nodded at Elias without meeting his eyes and went back to measuring sugar. 3 women stood near the fabric. They turned when the door opened, and the talking stopped like somebody had cut a wire. Clara recognized the type instantly. She had known women like this in Independence, women whose currency was other people's misfortune. The oldest was widow Ada Morrison. Gray hair pulled tight, sharp eyes, a mouth that settled naturally into disapproval. Next to her, Mrs. Fletcher from the bank, soft-faced and sweet-voiced, the kind of woman who delivered cruelty wrapped in concern. And a younger one, sharp-featured, whom Clara did not know. Lily Danforth, she would learn later. Married to the feed store owner. All 3 stared. At Clara, then at Elias, then back at Clara with expressions that mixed pity and curiosity in equal measure. Morrison leaned close to Fletcher. Her whisper carried clear across the quiet store. Poor thing. Fletcher shook her head. Cannot imagine living out there with him. Barely says 2 words to anyone. Lily Danforth pursed her lips. My husband says he is not right. Keeps to himself too much. Unnatural, that is what Henry calls it. Elias was at the counter with his back to them, but Clara saw his shoulders shift. Not a flinch, exactly. More like something settling heavier onto a load already carried. Something in the set of his spine changed. A small collapse that most people would have missed. Clara did not miss it. Morrison turned to Clara with that particular smile that women use when they want to help and hurt at the same time. Must be hard, dear. Out there all alone with him. And here was the moment Clara would replay in her head for weeks afterward, the moment she would flinch from every time she remembered it. Because what she should have done was straighten her spine and tell Morrison that Elias was kind to her, that he filled her water bucket every morning and fixed her chair and left wildflowers on the porch. What she should have done was defend him. What she did instead was look at the floor and say, in a voice barely above a whisper, "It is quiet out there." 3 words. A nothing sentence. But Morrison's eyes lit up with satisfaction, and Fletcher nodded in knowing sympathy, and Clara felt something curdle inside her chest because she knew what she had done. She had confirmed their pity. She had sided with the whispers. She had looked at a man who had done nothing but care for her in silence, and told the town he was not enough. Elias paid for the supplies at the counter, coins counted exact from a leather pouch. No credit, no account book. His voice was flat when he spoke to Garrett. 20 pounds of flour, 10 of sugar. Coffee if you have it. His movements were stiff as he gathered the sacks. He did not look at Clara, did not look at the women. They walked to the door. The women watched them go with the satisfied expressions of people who had confirmed what they already believed. Outside, the sun was too bright after the dim store. Clara's eyes watered. Heat hit her like a wall. She stood on the boardwalk blinking while Elias loaded the wagon, and that is when Hank Mercer appeared. He came from the direction of the bank. Big man, well over 6 feet, wide in the shoulders, wearing an expensive vest and polished boots that had no business on a working ranch. His smile was the kind that arrived before he did, broad and white and calculated. Mrs. Stone. His voice was warm, charming. Everything Elias's was not. What a pleasure. I do not believe we have been properly introduced. Hank Mercer. I own the ranch south of your husband's property. He took Clara's hand before she offered it and held it a beat too long. His grip was firm and deliberate. A man who was used to taking what he wanted and calling it courtesy. If you ever need anything, he continued, anything at all, my ranch is just an hour's ride. We are neighbors after all. He smiled wider. A woman like you should not want for company. Then he turned to Elias, and the warmth dropped out of his voice like a stone off a cliff. Still thinking about my offer, Stone? Water is getting scarce. Hate to see your cattle go thirsty. Elias's voice was flat. Cattle are fine. Mercer's smile stayed fixed, but his eyes went hard. For now. He tipped his hat to Clara and walked away. She watched him go and noticed something that nagged at her. The way Mercer looked at Elias was not just business, it was personal. There was a heat behind those eyes that went beyond land and water. Contempt, maybe. Or something worse, like a man who enjoyed having power over someone who could not fight back. "Why does he want your land?" Clara asked on the ride home. The silence lasted so long she thought he would not answer. "He wants what is under it." Water? A nod. So slight she almost missed it. They rode the rest of the way without speaking, but this silence was different from the morning silence. This one had guilt in it. Clara replayed what she had said in the mercantile. "It is quiet out there." She played it again and again like a sore tooth she could not stop touching. 3 words, harmless on the surface. But she had handed those women exactly what they wanted. Permission to pity her and condemn him, and Elias had heard it all. She pulled the Thomas letter from her pocket, looked at it. Her escape hatch. The half-written apology that doubled as a lifeline to a man who had once loved her and might take her back if she asked. She could mail it today. She could keep the door open. She looked at the letter. She looked at Elias's profile. The scar. The way he held the reins loose and steady despite everything. The way he had not said a word about what those women said or what Clara had failed to say in his defense. She put the letter back in her pocket. She was not ready to tear it up. Not yet. But something in her chest had shifted, and it felt like the first faint stirring of shame. 3 days later, while Clara was pulling weeds in the garden, a rider appeared at the west fence. Young, maybe 19, with a face that had not yet decided between boy and man. He sat his horse like somebody who spent most of his life in the saddle, hat in hand, jaw working like he was chewing on words that did not want to come out. "Ma'am." He cleared his throat. "You should know. There was someone threw a dead rabbit over your west fence last night. Had a note tied to it. Said leave. Just the one word." Clara straightened up. Dirt on her hands, dirt on her knees. "Who are you?" "Jack Dawson, ma'am. I work for Mercer." He swallowed hard. "I was supposed to do it. The rabbit. But I could not bring myself. Mercer sent someone else." His horse shifted beneath him and he gathered the reins tight. "I just thought you should know." He rode away before she could respond, dust kicking up behind his horse, the sound of hooves fading fast into the heat. Clara walked to the west fence, looked along the posts, found nothing. The grass was undisturbed, the wire intact. No rabbit, no note. Elias had already buried it. Found it in the dark, before dawn, the way he found most things, alone and without telling anyone. She walked back to the cabin slowly, her hands clenched at her sides, thinking about dead rabbits and whispered warnings, and a man who cleaned up threats in the dark so she would not have to see them. And for the first time since she arrived in Kansas, she felt something besides anger and shame. She felt protective. He had found the rabbit before dawn, the way he found most things, in the dark, alone, with no one watching. He buried it behind the barn and burned the note in the stove while the coffee heated. She did not need another reason to leave. She already had a letter in her pocket for that. Elias knew about the Thomas letter. He had seen it fall from Clara's pocket the first morning when she bent to pick up the water bucket. It landed on the porch face down, and the name on the front was clear in the early light. Thomas Calloway, Independence, Missouri. He picked it up and put it back on the porch rail where she would find it without knowing it had been seen. He understood what that letter meant. She had somewhere else to go, someone else to go to, a door she had not closed. He would not close it for her. If she left, she left. He had built his whole life around the principle that you did not hold what was not freely given. The morning after the rabbit, Clara sat in the rocking chair under the oak tree. The big one, thick-trunked and spreading, 50 yards from the cabin. She sat, and the chair lurched hard to the left, the old rocker uneven from years of weather and settling. Her hands flew to the armrests. Her pulse jumped in her throat. She stood fast, looked at the chair like it had bit her, and walked back to the porch, sat on the steps instead. Elias watched from the fence line where he was stringing wire. He saw the lurch, saw the fear in her body, saw her walk away. That evening, after she had gone to bed, he went to the oak tree in the moonlight and looked at the chair. This chair was the only thing he owned from his parents' house, the only thing he had been able to save. After they died, the town auctioned everything: furniture, dishes, tools, livestock. Elias was 10 years old and had 15 cents to his name, saved from collecting eggs for a neighbor. He spent it all on this chair, a rocking chair that nobody else wanted because the seat was cracked and the paint was peeling. It was the chair his mother sat in every evening, the chair where she read to him, the chair where she held him after nightmares. It was the only object in his life that carried love. He knelt in the grass and ran his hands over the rockers. The left one was warped, swollen from rain. He could fix it. Replace it with a new piece of ash wood, sanded smooth, fitted tight. It would take time, it would take care. But he could make it safe for her to sit in. He carried the chair to the barn, laid it on its side, got his tools. 2 mornings later, Clara came out with the wash water and stopped on the porch. Elias was kneeling under the oak tree, tools spread around him in the dewy grass. The rocking chair lay on its side. He had a draw knife in his hand and a piece of pale wood between his knees. He drew the blade toward himself in long, smooth pulls, and shavings curled away like ribbon and fell soft in the grass. He did not look up, did not acknowledge her watching. She went inside, kneaded bread dough, punched it down, shaped it, set it to rise, came back to the door an hour later. He was still there, same position. The pile of shavings had grown. Clara watched his hands. The way they moved on the wood was different from the way they moved on everything else. Fence posts and hammer and wire, those he handled with force and efficiency. But the draw knife moved slow, gentle, the way you would touch something you loved. That afternoon, while Elias was occupied with the chair, Clara walked the property. Past the barn, past the chicken coop with its 12 hens and 1 bad-tempered rooster, past the garden where tomatoes and beans were already heavy on the vine. He must have planted these back in early spring, months before she arrived, planning ahead for a wife he had not yet met. She kept walking, past the cattle pen, past the well, out to where the land opened up into rolling grass and empty sky. She waited for a fence, a boundary, something to stop her. Nothing did. The land just spread. She could walk to the road if she wanted, could keep walking. She turned back toward the cabin instead, not because she was trapped, because she chose to. Something shifted that afternoon. Small, almost invisible, but real. The next morning, while Clara was making biscuits, a hen got into the cabin through the door she had left propped open to catch the breeze. The bird jumped onto the table, grabbed a biscuit right off the plate, and started running. Little brown hen, moving faster than any chicken had a right to, biscuit clamped in its beak like stolen gold. Clara lunged, missed. The hen dodged left, knocked over the salt cellar, and sprinted for the door. Clara chased, hands grabbing at air. She slipped on the flour she had spilled earlier and caught herself on the table edge, which sent the mixing bowl spinning. Elias was coming up the porch steps with a load of fence wire over his shoulder. He saw the chicken, saw Clara chasing it, saw the flour on her nose and the fury in her eyes, and the absolute ridiculousness of the whole situation. His mouth twitched. Then he dropped the wire, and he was running too. Both of them, after one hen across the muddy yard. The chicken dodged right. Elias went left. The bird doubled back, heading straight between Clara's legs. She spun around, skirts flying. Elias slipped in a patch of mud by the water pump, caught himself on one knee, scrambled up. The hen escaped under the barn with the biscuit. They stood in the yard, muddy, breathless, both of them staring at the dark gap under the barn where the chicken had disappeared, victorious, biscuit and all. Elias made a sound, low, rough, rusty, like a door opening that had been sealed shut for years. It took Clara a moment to recognize it as laughter. "That was my best batch," she said. "She has got good taste." They looked at each other, muddy, winded, and for the first time since she had arrived, both smiling. Not the polite, careful smiles of strangers trying to get along. Real smiles. The kind that come up from somewhere deep and surprise you on the way out. Something broke open between them in that muddy yard. A wall that had been standing since the wagon pulled up 3 weeks ago developed its first crack. Small, but enough to let light through. That night, wolves came. The howling started after dark. Closer than usual, Will Carson had warned. Drought pushed them east, following the water. Elias sat up in the barn loft with his rifle across his knees and his ears tuned to every sound. The bay mare was restless below, stamping and blowing. The roan stood rigid with his ears pricked forward. The shot came at 3 in the morning. One report, sharp and clean, splitting the prairie dark. Clara woke to it, heart slamming. She ran to the window but could see nothing, just blackness and the fading echo of the gunshot rolling across the flat land. By dawn, she found the story written in the dirt. One gray wolf, big male, dead near the cattle pen. 2 calves bitten, one of them dead. And Elias coming in from the pasture with blood soaking through his left sleeve, dark and spreading, the fabric torn where teeth had gone in. He sat at the table like he always did not mention the wound, reached for his coffee. Clara saw the blood, stood up from her chair, went to the shelf where she kept clean cloths, and set one in front of him without a word. He looked at the cloth, looked at her. Something passed between them that was not quite gratitude and not quite surprise, but somewhere in between. He picked up the cloth and wrapped the wound. His hands were steady. The bite was deep, she could see that, but he tied the bandage tight and picked up his fork. Clara sat back down. Her throat was tight. She said nothing. But inside, she was thinking about how a man who could kill a wolf in the dark and wrap his own wound without flinching still could not manage to ask her to pass the salt. That afternoon, while Elias rode out to check on the rest of the herd, Clara walked the west boundary. She was looking for something and she found it. Fresh hoof prints, shod horses, not wild ones, deep enough to mean riders had stopped here. And the fence wire, which had been strung tight last week, was cut clean in 2 places. Not broken by weather or animal, cut with tools. The wolves had not wandered in, they had been let in. Clara stood there with the wind pulling at her skirt and her hands clenching at her sides. Then she went to the barn, found the wire and the pliers, and fixed the fence herself. She did it badly. The wire bit her palms and the pliers slipped and her stitches were crooked and loose. But she did it. When Elias rode back at sundown and past the west fence, he pulled his horse up short, stared at the mended wire, stared for a long time, then looked toward the cabin. Clara was on the porch. Her hands were wrapped in strips of the same cloth she had given him that morning, stained through with blood from the wire cuts. Neither of them spoke about it. Some things did not need words. That night, Clara lay in bed listening to the sounds she was learning to know. Barn door open. Close. Footsteps to the pump. Water splashing. Footsteps back toward the barn, then something different. Then something. A pause. She heard boots on grass instead of dirt, moving away from the barn toward the oak tree. The rocking chair creaked under his weight. He sat there in the dark for an hour. She knew because she lay awake counting the minutes, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of the chair going back and forth. He had finished the new rocker. The chair moved smooth now, even. No lurch, no wobble. He was testing it. When he finally rose and walked back to the barn, she crept to the window. Moonlight fell across the yard, bright enough to see by. The rocking chair was still swaying, gentle, slowing down. And on the armrest, something pale. She went out in bare feet, the grass cool and wet with dew. Picked it up. A wildflower, purple, stem still wet. He had cut it from somewhere and placed it there while he sat, while he rocked in his parents' chair that he had repaired for her. Nobody mentioned it in the morning. Clara put the flower in a tin cup on the windowsill where the morning light would catch it. Elias saw it when he came in for breakfast. His eyes rested on it for just a moment. Then he sat down and reached for the cornbread. But the corner of his mouth pulled up. Just a fraction. Just enough. The infection started on the 3rd day after the wolf bite, and by the 5th day, Elias could not grip a hammer. Clara watched his face turn the color of old tallow and made a decision. She was riding to town alone, whether the horse agreed or not. His arm was swollen from wrist to elbow, the skin around the bite gone red and hot, and streaked with lines that radiated outward like cracks in glass. He tried to work. Stubborn fool that he was. He pulled on his boots and walked to the fence line and stood there with the hammer dangling from his good hand, looking at it like he had forgotten what it was for. Clara came out onto the porch. "You need a doctor. It will pass." She had heard those words before. Her mother had said them when the cough first started. Her father had said them about his drinking. "It will pass" was the motto of people who would rather die than admit they needed help, and Clara was done watching people she cared about choose pride over survival. She caught the thought mid-stride. People she cared about. When had that happened? No time to examine it now. She went to the barn and saddled the bay mare. Her hands were still clumsy with the cinch strap, but Elias had been teaching her to ride over the past 2 weeks, patient, methodical, never raising his voice, and her fingers found the right tension on the 3rd try. She led the mare out of the barn and mounted up at the block. Elias was on the porch steps, gray-faced, leaning against the post. "You do not have to." But she was already riding. 7 miles to Stone Creek alone on a horse she had known for 3 weeks, across open prairie and fading afternoon light. The mare knew the road. Clara did not try to steer, just held the reins and let the horse carry her, and tried not to think about falling. The town appeared ahead as the sun dropped low. She went straight to the doctor's office, door locked. She pounded on the back door until a woman answered. Doctor's wife. The doctor himself was out at the Henderson farm. A breech calf. Would not be back until morning. Clara stood on the doorstep and explained what she needed. Carbolic acid for the wound, clean bandages, willow bark extract for the fever. The wife looked at her for a long moment, then went inside and came back with a bundle wrapped in cloth and a bottle of brown liquid. 75 cents, the wife said. Clara paid with coins from the kitchen jar, Elias's money. She did not ask permission because there was no time and because he was lying in his cabin with a fever climbing higher by the hour, and asking permission was a luxury she could not afford. She stopped at the Carson ranch on the way back. Ruth Carson was on the porch shelling peas. Clara stayed on the horse and talked fast. She needed to know something. Will Carson used to be county clerk. Did he know anything about warrants? About how long they lasted? About what happened if they were not acted on? Ruth went inside and came back with Will, who leaned on the porch rail, and looked up at Clara on the mare. "Why are you asking about warrants?" "Because someone might be coming for my husband with one, and I need to know if it is still good." Will rubbed his chin. Territorial statute says a warrant unexecuted for more than 10 years requires renewal by petition of the injured party. If nobody has petitioned for renewal, the warrant expires by operation of law. He paused. "That help?" "It might." "Thank you, Mr. Carson." She rode home in the dark. The mare picked her way carefully along the rutted road, and Clara trusted the horse because she had no choice. The stars came out thick and cold and impossibly far away. At the crossroads where the Stone Creek Road met the trail that ran south to Mercer's ranch, a horse was standing in the shadow of a cottonwood tree. Its rider straightened up when he heard Clara coming. "Ma'am," Jack Dawson's voice, tight with nerves, "I was hoping to catch you." Clara pulled the mare up. "What is it?" Jack leaned forward in his saddle. "Mercer has a man coming from Abilene. Private sort. Asks questions for money. He is looking for somebody named Kane. Used to work the Brennan place east of town back in '68. The night went very still around them. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked. "Because your husband gave me water last summer when Mercer's well ran dry. Told me not to tell nobody. Figured I owed him more than what I've been doing for Mercer." Jack gathered his reins. "Be careful, ma'am. Mercer does not play fair, and the man from Abilene does not play at all." He rode away into the dark. Clara sat the mare at the crossroads for a long time. Kane, Brennan, 1868. She did not have all the pieces yet, but she had enough to know that the man lying fever-sick in her cabin was carrying something heavier than a wolf bite. She got home after 9. Elias was on the bed, which meant his fever had driven him inside from the barn for the first time since she arrived. His face was gray and damp. His breathing was shallow. His wounded arm lay on top of the quilt, swollen and angry. Clara boiled water, cleaned the wound with carbolic while he hissed through his teeth, and gripped the edge of the bed with his good hand. She wrapped fresh bandages tight, mixed willow bark into hot water, and held the cup to his mouth until he drank. He looked at her through the haze of fever. His eyes were unfocused, but his voice was clear enough. "You rode to town, alone." "In the dark. I did." Something like wonder crossed his face. Then the fever pulled him under again. Clara sat beside the bed and watched him sleep. His face was slack and unguarded in a way she had never seen while he was awake. The scar looked different when the muscles around it relaxed. Less like a warning, more like a wound. She went to the table, pulled the Thomas letter from her pocket. Read it one last time. "Dear Thomas, I owe you an honest explanation for what I did." She thought about what Jack Dawson had told her on the road, about a name called Kane and a man coming from Abilene. She thought about the dead rabbit and the cut fence and the wolves. She thought about Mercer's smile and the way the town whispered. She was afraid. Not of Elias. She realized that with a clarity that surprised her. She was not afraid of the man sleeping 6 feet away with a fever and a scar, and God knew what kind of past. She was afraid of everything else. Mercer, the drought, the isolation, the sense of walls closing in from every direction. She picked up a pen, found a clean piece of paper, wrote a new letter. "Dear Thomas, I may need somewhere to go. If I write again, will you help me?" She sealed it, set it on the table, her exit door, renewed and ready. She went to bed, slept badly. Woke before dawn the way she had learned to do in this place. Gray light at the windows, cold air under the door, and by the door, the water bucket. Empty. For the first time since she arrived, the bucket was not filled. Elias was too sick to get up, too fevered to make his morning rounds. The stove was cold, the coffee pot empty. The cabin felt different without the evidence of his silent attention. Felt hollow. Clara got dressed, went to the well, drew the water herself, hauling the rope hand over hand, the bucket banging against the stone walls of the well shaft. She carried it back inside and set it by the door, handle facing out, the way Elias always left it. Then she saw the letter on the table, her letter to Thomas, her escape route. She looked at it. She looked at the bucket she had just carried. She looked through the doorway at Elias sleeping, his arm bandaged, his chest rising and falling with the slow rhythm of troubled rest. She picked up the letter, walked to the stove, opened the door, set the paper on the cold ashes, struck a match, watched the flame catch the edge and spread. The paper curled and browned and blackened, and the words she had written disappeared into smoke and heat. She closed the stove door. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was still. Not because she loved him, not yet, but because she had decided that running was the thing she would not do again. She had run from Thomas, from honesty, from the life she could have had if she had been brave enough to choose a kind man over a rich one. Running was what had brought her here. It would not take her away. The exit door was closed. There was no key to open it again. 3 days later, the fever broke. Elias sat up in bed, thin and pale but clear-eyed, and looked at Clara, who was sitting at the table drawing on a piece of brown wrapping paper with a stub of charcoal she had found in the stove. You stayed, he said. Not a question. Not surprise, exactly. More like a man confirming something he had been afraid to hope for. I stayed, Clara said. And for the first time, she meant it without reservation. Elias knew 3 things for certain. The drought would arrive before October. Mercer would not stop. And he was falling in love with his wife. The third thing was more terrifying than the other 2 combined. He had been watching her for weeks now, the way you watch weather building on the horizon. Not with alarm exactly, but with the understanding that something was coming that would change everything, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. He watched her draw. She did not know he knew. She thought she was hiding it, tucking the brown paper under her mattress, wrapping the charcoal stub in a scrap of cloth. But he had seen her shadow on the cabin wall one evening thrown by the lamplight. Her silhouette in profile, arm moving, hand steady. The shape of a woman making something beautiful out of nothing. He had also seen the charcoal missing from the stove. Had noticed the brown paper disappearing from the flour sacks. Had found a smudge of charcoal dust on the edge of the table where she had been working and wiped it away before he sat down. She was an artist, hiding it the way he hid his past, out of shame and habit, and the fear of being seen. That was when the structure on the North Hill changed in his mind. He had been building it as a room, a private space. Now he knew what kind of space she needed, and he began ordering different things: brushes, canvas, paint. Glass for the windows, real glass, 16 panes, so the light would pour in from every angle. He spent every dollar he had saved, 3 years of living spare, every penny going to brushes from St. Louis and oil paint in glass bottles and stretched canvases and real artist charcoal in wooden boxes. He worked on it evenings after supper and weekends when Clara thought he was checking fence. He carried lumber up the hill on his back, 1 board at a time, and framed the walls by moonlight. The glass had not arrived yet. 2 months it had been since he ordered it, but the walls were up and the window openings were cut, and the work table was level and smooth. On a morning in late July, with the heat already thick by breakfast, Elias made a decision. "Thought you might want to ride out today." He said it to his coffee cup. Could not look at her. "There is a place on the north pasture. Good view. Worth seeing." Clara's head came up from her plate. First time he had asked her for anything that was not work or necessity. "I would like that." "Dawn tomorrow, then. It will be a bit of a ride." They left before the sun cleared the horizon. Elias rode the roan. Clara rode the bay mare, side saddle still, but steady now, confident. He had been teaching her for weeks, and she had taken to it the way she took to everything, fierce and focused and too stubborn to quit. The prairie stretched flat for the first mile. Then the land began to roll. Gentle hills, shallow valleys, the grass already going yellow from the drought. Elias pointed things out as they rode. A buffalo wallow, old and empty. A cottonwood where hawks nested every spring. The marks where a creek bed used to run before the water dropped. He talked more on that ride than he had in the entire month before. He did not know why. Something about being out here, moving, the wind in his face made the words come easier. Or maybe it was her, the way she listened, with her whole body turned toward him in the saddle, her eyes sharp and interested. They circled wide around the North Hill. Elias took a different trail, avoiding the path where the structure stood half hidden in the brush. He had blocked that trail with branches. Clara noticed the detour. He saw her eyes move to the blocked path and then away. She said nothing. But she had seen. The climb to the hilltop took 15 minutes on foot. They left the horses tied to a scrub oak at the base and walked up a narrow trail that was more game path than road. Loose rock shifted under their boots. Clara's breath came faster. Elias offered his hand at a steep section. She took it. Her grip was strong. They crested the top, and Clara stopped walking. The prairies spread below them in every direction, rolling grass to the horizon. No end to it. The sky massive overhead, pale and endless. Morning light turned everything gold. The grass, the distant hills, even the air seemed to glow. Her breath caught, an actual physical catch in her throat. She reached into her pocket without thinking. Brown paper folded small. The charcoal stub wrapped in cloth. She had been carrying them for weeks, hoping for a moment like this. She unfolded the paper, smoothed it against her thigh, and began to draw. Elias moved back to the horses. He stood with his back mostly to her, one hand on the roan's neck, watching from the corner of his eye. Her hand flew across the paper. The charcoal smudged and darkened her fingertips. She used her thumb to blur shadows and her smallest finger to create light. She filled one page, flipped it, filled the back. The horizon, the hills, the way the grass met sky at the edge of the world. He watched her with an expression she could not see. Quiet satisfaction. Pride, maybe. Wonder. He had suspected she could draw, but seeing her come alive like this, the focused stillness, the intensity, the way her hands moved with a confidence she never showed anywhere else, that was something different entirely. He had brought her here because he knew. Somehow, without words, without evidence beyond a missing piece of charcoal and a shadow on a wall, he had known she needed this. She drew for an hour, filled 3 pages front and back, used the charcoal down to a nub. Her fingers were black to the second knuckle, and she was breathing hard, and when she finally lowered the paper, there were tears on her cheeks that she wiped away with the back of her wrist, leaving a charcoal streak. "Could I see what you drew?" Elias asked, approaching slow, stopping 6 feet away. Nobody had ever asked to see her drawings, not her mother, not her sisters. Her father had called it foolishness, waste of time and good paper. She hesitated, her hands tight on the pages. Then she held them out. Elias took the pages by the edges so his rough hands would not smudge the charcoal. He looked at each one carefully, his eyes moving across the lines the way a man reads something important. He did not speak. He turned each page slowly, studied the front, studied the back. When he reached the last page, the sketch of the cottonwood with the hawk nest, he held it longest. "You see things different than most folks do." His voice was quiet. "Certain. Better, I reckon. You see what is really there." He handed the pages back carefully. "Real fine work, Clara. Real fine." On the ride back, she took the detour trail. While Elias watered the horses at a shallow creek bed, she doubled back alone. Through the branches he had placed across the path, she saw it. 4 walls of good lumber, window openings, large-sized for 16 panes of glass, a work table inside, rough-cut but sanded level, no roof yet. The structure was open to the sky. She stood there with her hand on the doorframe. She did not fully understand what it was, but she felt the scale of it, the months of labor, the careful planning. The window openings placed to catch the north light, the best light for painting, though she did not know if he knew that or if it was instinct. He had been building this for months, since before she arrived, for a woman he had not yet met. Her throat closed up. She rode back to the horses before he could notice she was gone. That evening they sat under the oak tree. Clara in the rocking chair. Elias on the ground beside her with his back against the trunk. The longest conversation they had ever had. He told her about his parents, the fever, the auction, growing up working other men's land. He did not mention Brennan. Clara did not press. She already had pieces from Jack Dawson's warning on the road, but she wanted him to tell her himself, when he was ready. She reached down and touched his shoulder. He froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. She felt it under her hand, the coiled tension, like touching a wire stretched too tight. She held still, did not pull away. Slowly, he leaned his forehead against the back of her hand. The contact was light. She could feel his breath warm on her knuckles. 1 second. 2. His forehead against her hand. Then he pulled away, stood, and stepped back. "Good night, Clara." She sat alone in the rocking chair, the warmth of his skin fading on her knuckles. and listened to his footsteps crossing the yard toward the barn. The barn door opened, closed. She sat there for a long time. Something was growing between them that had no name yet. Something that lived in the space between a wildflower on an armrest and a hand on a shoulder, and the way he looked at her drawings like they mattered. But there was a cloud coming. She could feel it the way Elias felt weather. Something building. Something about to break. The following week, Clara went into town for supplies. She walked into the mercantile and heard her own words thrown back at her. Morrison was holding court by the fabric bolts, telling Fletcher in that carrying whisper, "That new wife of Stone's, even she says it is hard out there. Told me herself it was quiet. Poor girl is miserable and will not admit it." Clara stood in the doorway and felt the words hit like a slap. Her words. Her careless, cowardly words from 3 weeks ago, recycled and amplified and turned into ammunition against the man who filled her water bucket every morning. She bought her supplies. Said nothing. Rode home in silence. But inside, she was burning. Not at Morrison, at herself. Elias knew. She could tell the moment she walked in. He was quieter than usual that evening. The distance between them, which had been shrinking day by day, inch by inch, stretched back out. He went to the barn early, did not sit under the oak. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. Next time she stood in that mercantile, she would not fail him again. The following Sunday, a stranger rode into Stone Creek. Clara did not see him arrive. She heard about it from Ruth Carson, who rode over the next morning with a basket of peaches and a face drawn tight with worry. "There is a man in town," Ruth said, wearing a marshal's badge, asking about a man named Kane. Clara set down the peach she was holding. Her hand was steady, her heart was not. She had known this was coming, since the crossroads, since Jack Dawson, since she sat on that hilltop and drew the most beautiful place she had ever seen and knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she was not going to lose it without a fight. Clara was hanging wash when she saw the dust rising on the south road. One rider, then two. The first wore a black vest and sat his horse like a man who had done a lot of riding and not much else. The second she recognized immediately. Hank Mercer riding his brown gelding, smiling like a man holding a winning hand. Elias was 2 miles out, mending fence in the south pasture. He had left at dawn with wire and post-hole digger over his shoulder. He would not be back before noon. Clara pulled the last sheet off the line and walked to the porch. She smoothed her apron, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, took a breath, then another. The riders pulled up in the yard. The man in the black vest dismounted. He was maybe 45, with a thick mustache and tired eyes and a badge pinned to his vest that caught the sun. His saddlebags were fat with paper. "Ma'am," he touched his hat brim. "Marshal Tom Avery, out of Abilene. I am looking for a man named Elias Kane. I have information that he may be residing on this property under a different name." Behind him, Mercer sat his horse with his arms crossed over the saddle horn, looking around the yard with the expression of a man inspecting property he expected to own soon. Clara kept her voice level. "My husband is not here at the moment. May I ask what this concerns?" Avery reached into his saddlebag and produced a folded document. "This is a warrant issued by the county sheriff in Abilene in 1868. The charge is assault with intent to kill. The named party is Elias Kane." Clara held out her hand. "May I see that?" Avery hesitated, glanced at Mercer, then handed it over. Clara unfolded the paper and read it the way she had once read her father's ledgers. Carefully. Looking for the number that did not add up, the date that did not match, the entry that should not be there. The warrant was dated September 20th, 1868, 15 years ago. The named party was Elias Kane, described as male, approximately 17 years of age, last known to be in the vicinity of the Brennan Ranch east of Abilene. Clara read it twice, then she looked up. "Marshal, when was this warrant last renewed?" Avery blinked. Excuse me? Under Kansas territorial statute, a warrant that remains unexecuted for a period exceeding 10 years requires renewal by petition of the injured party. A former county clerk by the name of Will Carson explained this to me. Clara kept her voice steady, though her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Has Silas Brennan filed for renewal? Avery opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked at the warrant in Clara's hands. He looked at his saddlebags. He looked uncomfortable. Mercer leaned forward in his saddle. That is beside the point. Clara turned to him. Her eyes were steady. Her voice was steel wrapped in cotton. Actually, Marshal, that is the point. This warrant expired in 1880 by operation of law. If Mr. Brennan wishes to renew it, he may petition the court in Abilene. Until he does, you have no legal authority to arrest anyone on this property. Silence settled over the yard like dust after a windstorm. A horse stamped. A fly buzzed. Avery took the warrant back from Clara and studied it. His mustache twitched. He turned to Mercer. She may have a point, Hank. Mercer's smile disappeared. The mask fell away, and what was underneath was not pleasant. Brennan will renew it. I will personally see to it. Clara folded her arms. Then come back when he does. Mercer stared at her. Something shifted in his eyes, a recalculation. He had expected to find a frightened woman. He had not expected this. Avery mounted up, touched his hat to Clara, and rode out. Mercer stayed. He sat his horse in the yard and looked down at Clara standing on the porch, and the silence between them was a different kind than the silence between her and Elias. This silence had teeth. Your husband, Mercer said, or whatever he is a wanted man. I know what he did, I know who he was, and I will make certain this entire territory knows it too. Why? Clara asked. Why do you want him gone so badly? Mercer's jaw tightened. Because I need what he has and he will not sell it. Because my cattle are dying and his are drinking from a spring that should have been mine. Because I offered him a fair price 3 times, and he refused 3 times, and I am not a man who takes refusal lightly. So this is about water. This is about survival, Mrs. Stone, mine and my herds. I have 500 head of cattle and a creek that is running dry. Your husband is sitting on the only year-round water source in this valley, and he will not share it, and he will not sell it. So yes, I will use whatever tool I can find to move him off that land, including his past. Clara looked at him and saw something she had not expected. Behind the bluster and the expensive vest and the calculated smile, Hank Mercer was afraid. He was a man watching everything he had built slide toward the edge of a cliff, grabbing at whatever handhold he could reach. That did not make him less dangerous. It made him more. You should leave now, Clara said. Mercer turned his horse. Then he stopped and looked back. One more thing. You might want to ask your husband about a man named Silas Brennan. Ask him what he did to that old man. Ask him what kind of animal you married. He rode away. Clara stood on the porch until the dust settled. Then she went inside and sat at the table and waited for Elias to come home. He came at a run. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw him, the roan at full gallop across the south field, Elias leaning forward in the saddle. He had seen the tracks. 2 horses that did not belong. He burst through the door. His eyes went to her first, checking, making sure. You all right? I am fine. Marshal Avery was here, with Mercer. His face went still. The color drained out of it slow, like water leaving a basin. He sank into the chair across from her. His hands were flat on the table, and she could see them shaking. He knows, Elias said. His voice was hollow. About Kane. About Brennan. He knows everything. The warrant is expired, Clara said. I told the marshal. He had no authority to arrest you. Elias looked at her like she was speaking a language he did not recognize. You told him. How did you know about the warrant? Will Carson explained the law to me. I stopped by their ranch when I rode to town for your medicine. She paused. And Jack Dawson told me someone was asking about a man named Kane. Elias stared at her. The silence stretched. Then his head dropped and he pressed his palms against his eyes. You knew. You already knew. Before the marshal came. Before today. And you stayed. Clara did not answer that. Instead, she said, "Tell me. Tell me what happened. Tell me about Brennan. Tell me all of it." Elias sat still for a long time. Then he stood up, went to the high shelf, took down the wooden box with the brass latch, set it on the table between them. He opened it. Inside, a broken piece of horsewhip, 6 inches long, braided leather, dark with old blood. Clara looked at it, looked at the scar on his face, the scar the whip had made, looked at his hands still trembling on the table. He told her everything. Brennan, the whip, 4 years of beatings, the September evening when the calf broke fence and Brennan came at him, how he grabbed the whip, how he shoved, how Brennan's skull hit the stone edge of the water trough and blood spread on the surface of the water. And the half-second, the one that haunted him worst, the flash of satisfaction, the dark pleasure of seeing his abuser fall. "That is what I am," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "That is what lives inside me." I felt good when he went down. For 1/2 second I was glad. And that is why I keep this. He touched the whip fragment. To remind myself what I am capable of. Clara looked at the broken whip. She looked at the scar. She looked at the man. "You were 17 years old," she said. "He had been beating you for 4 years. You grabbed the whip to stop him, not to kill him. That is not murder, Elias. That is survival." He shook his head. "The satisfaction. That is the part that makes you human," Clara said. "Every person alive has felt relief when pain stops. You did not go after him. You did not hit him again. You ran. You spent 15 years punishing yourself for a half-second of feeling that anyone would have felt." She reached across the table and closed the lid of the box. Her hand rested on top of it. "And I burned my way out of here 2 weeks ago, so do not bother telling me I can leave. I already closed that door." He did not understand the reference. She did not explain it. She just held his eyes and said, "I am not going anywhere, Elias." His shoulders dropped. His chest heaved once, twice. One tear tracked down his face, following the path of the scar. He did not make a sound. He just sat there, breaking open and putting himself back together at the same time, and Clara watched him do it without looking away. That night, for the first time, Elias did not go to the barn. He sat at the kitchen table with his head bowed over his hands. Clara sat across from him. They did not touch, did not speak, just sat together in the darkness. 2 people with nothing left to hide. Outside, the Kansas wind howled, dry and hot, carrying the smell of dust and dying grass. The drought was here, and something worse was coming. Clara woke with a plan. Not the plan of a frightened bride. The plan of a bookkeeper's daughter who understood debt and leverage and the mathematics of desperate men. She had lain awake most of the night thinking while Elias slept in the chair by the table, the first night he had spent inside the cabin since she arrived. His breathing was steady and slow, and she listened to it in the dark and thought about Mercer and about warrants and about the way a bully's power only lasted as long as nobody pushed back. Mercer's weapon was information. He knew Elias's past. He had a marshal in his pocket, or at least on his payroll for the day. He had the town's ear and the town's fear. But Clara knew something about bullies. She had lived with one for 8 years after her mother died. Her father had been a small-time tyrant, king of a dry goods store, terrorizing his daughters and his creditors with equal enthusiasm. And the thing about small-time tyrants was that they were always in debt. She saddled the bay mare after breakfast. Elias watched her from the porch. "Where are you going?" "Town. I have business." She saw him start to speak. Stop himself. He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. "Be careful." She rode the 7 miles with her back straight and her mind working. She had 3 stops to make, and she would make them in the right order. First stop, Ada Morrison's house. The widow lived in a white house at the edge of town, neat and small, with rose bushes in front that were dying in the drought. Clara tied the mare and knocked on the door and stood there sweating in the morning heat until Morrison opened up, looking like she had been interrupted in the middle of prayer or gossip or both. "Mrs. Morrison, may I come in?" Morrison's eyes narrowed. "What is this about?" Clara did not hesitate. "I told you something 3 weeks ago that was not true. I said it was quiet out there. I was wrong. It is not quiet. It is peaceful. And there is a difference. And I was too proud to see it." Morrison blinked. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. Clara continued. "Your husband. He died 3 years ago. Horse accident, I heard." "Was it an accident?" The change in Morrison's face was immediate and total. The sharpness, the social armor, all of it fell away, and underneath was a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a long time. "Come in," Morrison said. They sat at Morrison's kitchen table with coffee neither of them touched. Morrison told the story she had never told anyone. Her husband, James Morrison, had owned 40 acres of good grazing land south of Mercer's property. Mercer had wanted it. James refused to sell. 3 months later, James was found dead on the road, thrown from his horse. The horse was sound. The road was flat. Nobody investigated. Nobody asked questions. But James had written a letter the week before he died. A letter describing Mercer's threats, how Mercer had come to the house at night, how he had told James to sell or face consequences. Morrison had kept the letter in a trunk in her bedroom for 3 years, too afraid to show anyone. She opened the trunk now, took out the letter, and underneath it, something else. A receipt. Payment from Hank Mercer to Reverend Josiah Whitfield in the amount of $50 for consultation regarding the Morrison property. "The minister," Clara said. "He is taking money from Mercer." "Has been for years," Morrison said. "Every land dispute in this town, Whitfield steers it Mercer's way. Tells folks it is God's will. Tells them to sell. Told my James that resisting a more powerful neighbor was the sin of pride." Clara looked at the receipt, then at Morrison. "You kept this for 3 years." "Why?" "Because I was afraid." Morrison's voice cracked. "Because Mercer owns this town, and I am a widow with no money and no power, and I was afraid of what he would do." Clara reached across the table and took Morrison's hand. "I am not afraid," she said, and it was almost true. Second stop, the bank. Clara walked into the Stone Creek Bank and Trust, such as it was. A single room with a counter and a desk and a safe the size of a man. Behind the desk sat Arthur Yates, the banker. Thin, precise, with spectacles that sat on the end of his nose like they were trying to escape. "Mrs. Stone, what can I do for you?" "I would like to see the deed record for my husband's property, confirming ownership and any liens." Yates hesitated. "That is somewhat irregular." "Mr. Yates, I am asking to see public records regarding property that belongs to my husband. There is nothing irregular about it." He produced the records. Clara read them carefully. The deed was clean. Elias Stone, 200 acres, no liens, no debts, no encumbrances. Paid in full with cash. 15 years of payments, not a single one late, not a single dollar borrowed. She set the papers down. "Mr. Yates, how much does Hank Mercer owe this bank?" Yates turned the color of old milk. "I cannot disclose. You do not have to." Clara folded her hands on the desk. "Let me tell you what I think. I think Mercer borrowed heavily to buy up land around my husband's property. I think his herd is dying because his creek is dry. I think he cannot make his loan payments because dead cattle do not earn money. And I think that if his debts were called in today, he would lose everything." Yates said nothing, which said everything. Clara stood. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Yates. I appreciate your discretion." She walked out. Yates sat behind his desk looking like a man who had just watched a tornado pass through his office. Third stop, the feed store. Jack Dawson was loading sacks of grain into a wagon out front. He saw Clara coming and his face went pale. "Ma'am, I did not." "Relax, Jack. I am not here to cause trouble for you. I just need to know what is happening at Mercer's ranch." Jack looked around, lowered his voice. "It is bad, ma'am. He has not paid us in 3 weeks. Most of the hands have left. Only me and 2 others still there. And I am only staying because I have nowhere else to go. Cattle are dying. 10, 12 a week. The creek is down to nothing. He is borrowing from everybody and paying nobody." Jack paused. "He is worse when he is cornered, ma'am. A cornered animal bites hardest." Clara nodded. "Thank you, Jack. If things get too bad out there, you come to our ranch. My husband could use the help." Jack stared at her. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." She rode home with the sun high and hot on her back and her mind working like a ledger, adding up columns, balancing accounts. Mercer was the most dangerous man in the valley, but he was also the weakest. His power was an illusion built on borrowed money and borrowed time, and both were running out. Elias was on the porch when she rode up. He came to help her dismount, his hands on her waist, steadier than the first time, lingering a fraction longer. She told him everything: Morrison's letter, Whitfield's corruption, Mercer's debts, the dying cattle, the unpaid hands. Elias listened. His face changed as she talked. She watched astonishment replace wariness, and wonder replace astonishment. When she finished, he stared at her like he was seeing someone new. "You did all that today? Alone? You build with your hands. I fight with paper." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, softened. Then, quietly, like a man stating a fact he had just discovered, he said, "We make a good pair then." That evening, Elias did not go to the porch with his Bible. He sat in the rocking chair inside the cabin, spectacles on, reading by lamplight. Clara drew at the table. First time he had stayed inside after dark since the night he told her about Brennan. The cabin felt different with him in it. The air thicker, every sound louder, the creak of the rocking chair when he shifted weight, the rustle of pages turning, his breathing steady and even. After a while he closed the Bible and looked at her. "After the church wedding, when it is proper, I have something to show you, something I have been building." Clara kept her eyes on her drawing. Her heart was beating fast. She already knew about the structure on the hill, but she said, "I will wait." He nodded, opened his Bible again. She returned to drawing. The silence between them was not empty anymore. It was full of everything they had been through and everything still coming. They were eating supper when the smell hit. Not wind, not dust, smoke. Clara dropped her fork, ran to the porch. The western horizon glowed orange, pulsing, alive. A line of fire stretching a mile wide, maybe more, moving across the dry prairie grass, driven by a wind that had not been blowing an hour ago. And it was running straight at them. Prairie fire does not need an invitation. It needs wind, dry grass, and a single match. Clara knew who struck that match. Elias was already moving. He grabbed his hat and the rifle and was off the porch in 2 strides, running toward the cattle pen. The orange glow on the western horizon was spreading, climbing, lighting the underside of the smoke like a false dawn. "Turn the horses loose," he shouted over his shoulder. "Get them out of the barn. Head them east." "East, Clara, away from the fire." She ran. The barn door was heavy, but she hauled it open and went to the stalls. The bay mare was already wild-eyed, stamping, tossing her head. The roan was rigid with fear, nostrils flared wide. Clara unlatched the stalls and grabbed the mare's halter and pulled. The horse fought her. She pulled harder. The mare came lurching, and Clara slapped her on the flank and pointed her toward the east pasture. The roan followed without being led, the herd instinct overriding the panic. Outside, Elias had the cattle pen open and was driving the herd east with shouts and the crack of his hat against his leg. 60 head of cattle, confused and bellowing, moving in a ragged mass across the darkening prairie. The sky behind them was orange and growing brighter. Smoke reached them first. thick, acrid, stinging her eyes and catching in her throat. Then embers carried on the wind, small and hot, landing on the dry grass and blooming into tiny fires that Elias stamped out as he ran. One ember landed on the barn roof. The dry shingles caught instantly. Clara saw the flame lick up the edge of the roof and shouted. Elias turned, saw it. His face went tight. He looked at the barn, looked at the fire line coming from the west, and made a calculation that Clara could read from 30 feet away. The barn was lost. They could not save it and save the ranch. He turned and ran. Not toward the barn. Toward the hill. The North Hill. Clara ran after him. Through smoke, through grass that crackled with heat, past the garden where the tomato vines were already wilting from the radiant warmth. She caught up to him at the base of the hill. What are you doing? The spring, he was breathing hard. If I break through the rock cap over the aquifer, the water will flood downhill, create a fire break, save the house, the cattle, the land, but... Clara looked up the hill. Through the smoke, she could see the dark shape of the structure. His structure. The walls he had framed. The window openings he had cut. 6 months of work. The glass panes that had finally arrived last week and been carefully set into their frames. If the water floods downhill, she said, it will go right through. Elias did not answer. He picked up the axe he kept at the base of the hill and started climbing. Clara climbed after him. The smoke was thicker up here, carried upward by heat. She could see the fire now, not just the glow but the actual flames, a wall of orange and yellow moving across the prairie a quarter-mile away. The wind was pushing it fast. They reached the top. The structure stood there in the smoky dark. 4 walls, 16 glass panes catching the firelight, a roof he had just finished nailing down last week, a door with a brass handle. Inside, she could see through the windows, 2 easels, stacks of canvas, jars of brushes. Everything he had bought for her, everything he had saved for 3 years to afford. Elias stood at the rock outcropping where the spring bubbled up, the thin capstone covering the main flow. The axe hung at his side. He was looking at the building. Break it open, Clara said. Her voice was steady. Save the land. You can build it again. He looked at her. The firelight painted his face in orange and shadow, and the scar stood out dark against the glow. His eyes were wet. He raised the axe, brought it down. The capstone cracked on the 3rd blow. Water erupted from the earth, cold and ancient, surging up and over the rock and flooding down the hillside in a wide sheet. It poured across the grass, cutting a dark swath through the dry yellow, spreading wider as it descended. The water reached the fire line and hit it with a sound like 1,000 snakes hissing at once. Steam billowed up, white and thick, mixing with the smoke. The flames sputtered, faltered, died where the water ran. The fire break held. The water kept coming, feeding from the aquifer that had been building pressure underground for years. It ran downhill in rivulets and streams, fanning out across the property, turning the dust to mud. It also ran through the studio. The water poured over the threshold and spread across the floor. It rose around the easel legs, lifted the canvases and set them floating. It hit the walls and seeped through the joints and loosened the nails. The glass panes, 16 of them, each one ordered from St. Louis and carried up this hill by hand, disappeared under a tide of brown water and silt. The frame leaned, groaned, one wall buckled outward. All buckled, the roof sagged. Elias stood on the hilltop with the axe hanging from his hand, watching 6 months of work dissolve into mud and ruin. His face was blank, his shoulders were hunched forward, and in the flickering light of the dying fire, he looked like a man who had just broken his own heart to save someone else's. Clara waded into the wreckage. The water was cold around her ankles, knee-deep in places. She felt with her hands through the mud and debris, searching. Her fingers found a wooden crate wedged against the work table. She hauled it free. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax, the sable hair brushes, glass bottles of oil paint, real charcoal sticks in a wooden box, all dry, all protected. Elias had waterproofed the supplies, even though the building was not yet waterproof. He had protected her tools more carefully than the structure that housed them. Because the building could be rebuilt, brushes from St. Louis could not be replaced. Clara stood in the mud and the water, holding the crate of brushes against her chest. Tears ran down her face, cutting tracks through the soot and ash. She was not crying for the building. She was crying for the man who had built it. By dawn, the fire was out. The ranch stood muddy and scorched at the edges, but whole. The barn had lost its roof and part of one wall, but the frame was standing. The cabin was untouched. The cattle were scattered across the east pasture, but alive. The North Hill Spring ran free now, a permanent stream cutting down the hillside, feeding into the flat land below. The water that had destroyed the studio would sustain the ranch for years. And by mid-morning, word reached Stone Creek that changed everything. Hank Mercer was arrested. The fire had started on his property. Jack Dawson testified to Marshal Avery that Mercer had ordered a brush pile burned to destroy records of his debts, ledgers, and loan documents he did not want the bank to see. The fire escaped into the prairie and spread east, driven by a wind that Mercer could not have predicted and could not control. The charge was criminal negligence and arson. Marshal Avery, who had ridden out for Elias's warrant just days before, now carried a different warrant. This one had Hank Mercer's name on it. The Territory Jail in Dodge City had a cell waiting, and Mercer rode there in shackles in the back of a wagon, his expensive vest covered in ash, his empire in ruins. Jack Dawson showed up at Elias's ranch that afternoon, hat in hand, asking for work. Elias looked at him for a long time. "You testified against your boss." "Yes, sir. Should have done it sooner." Elias nodded. "Can you shoe a horse?" "Yes, sir." "Then you are hired. There is a bunk in what is left of the barn. We will fix the roof tomorrow." Clara stood on the porch and watched Elias shake the young man's hand. Then she looked at the muddy hillside where the studio had been. The frame was ruined. The glass was buried. But the crate of brushes and paint sat on the porch beside her, dry and safe. She could wait. They had time now. The fire was out, the bully was gone, and the water was flowing. On the morning of the church wedding, Elias woke at 4. Not to feed cattle, not to mend fence. He woke because he had one thing left to finish before the sun came up. Something he had kept hidden in the barn for 3 weeks, wrapped in burlap, waiting for this exact day. He dressed in the dark, moved quiet so he would not wake Clara, who had fallen asleep in the rocking chair by the window again with a drawing pad in her lap. She had been drawing every night since the fire, working by lamplight, filling page after page with images of the prairie, the cabin, the horses, the oak tree. She had drawn him once. He had found it on the shelf beside his Bible, a charcoal sketch of his hands, every scar, every callus, every crack. She had seen his hands the way she saw everything, with the clear, unflinching eye of an artist who drew what was true rather than what was flattering. He had looked at that drawing for 10 minutes. Then he had picked it up and held it against his chest, and stood there in the cabin alone, feeling something crack open inside him that had been sealed shut for 15 years. He went to the barn in the dark. Jack Dawson was asleep on the bunk they had rigged up in the rebuilt corner. The boy did not stir. Elias found the burlap bundle by touch and carried it inside to the cabin. He lit a lamp, set it low, spread a clean cloth on the kitchen table, the oak table where they had eaten every meal since she arrived, the table where she had drawn and he had read, and they had sat in darkness together on the night he told her about Brennan. He placed 3 objects on the table, each covered with a cloth. Then he went outside to do morning chores and wait for the day to begin. Clara woke to the smell of coffee. She opened her eyes and saw him standing by the stove in a dark wool suit she had never seen before. White shirt beneath, string tie at his throat. His hair was combed back wet. He had shaved, and there was a small cut on his jaw where the razor had slipped. He turned when he heard her stir. His eyes went to her and stayed. "Morning," he said. "You are dressed up. It is our wedding day, the official one." On the chair beside her bed, a dress she had not seen before. White muslin, fine weave, tiny buttons up the front. Lace at the collar and cuffs. She touched it. The fabric was soft and new and expensive. "When did you get this?" "Sent away for it, 2 months ago. Ruth Carson took your measurements without you knowing. That day she came to bring peaches." Clara held the dress against herself. It would fit. She could tell from the weight and the way it hung. Her throat went tight. "Thank you. 14 buttons." She fastened them one by one, her fingers clumsy with something that was not nerves exactly, but close. She braided her hair and pinned it up. No mirror in the cabin, so she smoothed the fabric over her hips and straightened the collar by feel. She opened the door. Elias was on the porch. He turned and looked at her, and his mouth fell open. "Does it fit all right?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer from his face. "You look—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "Real fine. You look real fine." He offered his arm. She took it. The muscle beneath his sleeve was rigid with tension. They walked to the wagon together. He helped her up, his hands on her waist, and she felt them trembling. The ride to Stone Creek took an hour and a half. The September morning was cool, the first break from the August heat. Dew on the grass caught the sunlight and made the whole prairie shimmer. The church stood at the end of Main Street. White clapboard, small steeple, bell visible through the opening at the top. Wagons were gathered in front, 20 at least. People on the steps. Clara recognized Morrison, Fletcher, the Carsons, Yates from the bank, families she had not met. 50 people, maybe more. Elias pulled up and set the brake, climbed down, came around to help Clara. When her feet touched the ground, he did not release her waist. He stood there looking at her face with an expression she had never seen from him, open, unguarded, terrified, and hopeful at the same time. "You can still change your mind," he said, low enough for only her to hear. "Right now. I will take you anywhere you want to go. No questions." Clara put her hand over his on her waist. "I am not changing my mind." His eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, maybe, finding none. He nodded once, offered his arm. They walked up the church steps together. People parted to let them through. Inside, narrow windows let in slanted morning light. Wooden pews on either side of a center aisle. Simple altar at the front. The minister was new. A young woman from Topeka, Reverend Sarah Colby, who had replaced Whitfield after Morrison's evidence forced his removal. Small detail, but it said everything about how the town was changing. Elias led Clara to the front. They stood facing the minister. The congregation settled behind them. Wood creaking, whispers dying down. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today in the sight of the Lord to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Clara barely heard the traditional words. She was aware only of Elias's hand holding hers, his palms sweating, his pulse hammering through his skin so hard she could count the beats. "Do you, Elias Stone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" His voice cracked on the first word. He stopped, cleared his throat, tried again. "I do. Steady that time. Certain. Do you, Clara Marlowe, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara spoke her own vows. She had written them in her head last night, sitting in the rocking chair while he slept. "I take you, Elias. Not the name you were given and not the name you chose, but the man you are, the one who builds and mends and stays. I have seen the worst you fear about yourself, and I am still here. I choose you, all of you. That is my vow." Silence in the church. Then the minister smiled. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Kansas and Almighty God, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Elias turned to her. His eyes were wide, uncertain, like he did not know if he was allowed. Clara leaned up and kissed him. Not gentle, not brief, intentional. His hand came up and cupped her cheek, just his fingertips, feather light. When she pulled back, he was smiling. Full smile, teeth showing. The scar bent with it, became part of the joy instead of apart from it. Applause from the pews, scattered at first, then growing. They turned and walked back down the aisle together, and this time people were not just watching. They were nodding, smiling. Ruth Carson was crying openly into her handkerchief. Outside, tables had been set up in the churchyard. Simple food, bread, cheese, dried apples, coffee in large pots. People gathered, talking, glancing at Elias and Clara. The tone was different now. The whispers had a different sound. Warmer. 20 minutes into the reception, Elias stepped away from Clara and walked to the center of the yard. He cleared his throat, loud enough to carry. Conversation stopped. Everyone turned. "Could you, folks?" His voice was rough, and he cleared his throat again. "Would you mind coming out to the ranch? Got something I would like to show you. Will not take long." Confusion. People looking at each other. Morrison spoke first. "I will come." Then Carson. Then others. Curious now. They followed in a procession of wagons, 12, 15, strung out along the road in a line of dust and creaking wheels. Elias drove with Clara beside him, her hand resting on his arm. "What are we doing?" she asked. "Something I should have shown you sooner." They did not go to the hill. The studio was in ruins up there, nothing but a muddy frame and buried glass. Instead, Elias led the procession to the cabin and helped Clara down and opened the door. Everyone filed in. 50 people crowding into a cabin built for two. Standing along the walls, filling the doorway, craning their necks to see. The kitchen table stood in the center of the room. On it, 3 objects, each covered with a cloth. Elias stood beside the table. He looked at Clara, then at the gathered townspeople, the people who had whispered about him for 15 years, who had called him strange, who had pitied his wife and judged his silence. He pulled away the first cloth. A document. The land deed. 200 acres, spring and water rights included. Signed over entirely to Clara Marlowe Stone. Her name, her property. If anything happened to him, arrest, accident, anything, she kept the land. She kept the home. No man, no warrant, no creditor could take it from her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Yates, the banker, leaned in, read the document, and nodded slowly. "It is properly executed," he said. Elias pulled the second cloth. A letter, addressed to Silas Brennan, Abilene, Kansas, unsealed so that Clara and anyone present could read it. Written in Elias's careful handwriting, the letters formed slow and deliberate by a man who had more practice with a hammer than a pen. "Mr. Brennan, my name was Elias Kane. I worked your ranch in 1868. I was 17 years old when I shoved you into the water trough and ran. I have carried that night for 15 years. I am not writing to make excuses. I am writing to say that I will not run again. If you want justice, tell the court and I will stand before it. I will answer for what I did, but I will not let my past destroy the woman who chose to stand beside me. She deserves a husband who faces what he has done. So here I am, facing it. Elias Stone, born Elias Kane." The cabin was silent. Morrison's hand covered her mouth. Fletcher was weeping. Even Yates removed his spectacles and pressed a hand to his eyes. Elias pulled the third cloth, the wooden box, the one from the high shelf, the one Clara had noticed her first night in the cabin and wondered about ever since, the one she had seen opened in the firelight with the broken whip inside. Elias opened the brass latch. Inside, no whip. The fragment of braided leather was gone. In its place, a gold ring, thin, worn smooth with age, his mother's wedding ring, the only beautiful thing from a life that had held very little beauty. He had kept it all these years, hidden beneath the whip, buried under the memory of violence. Now the violence was gone, removed, replaced. He lifted the ring. His hands were shaking badly. He took Clara's left hand. "This was my mother's. It is the only beautiful thing I ever owned. Until you." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. Clara looked at the table. The deed with her name. The letter that stripped him bare before the entire town. The ring on her finger. He had laid everything on that table. Every secret, every fear, every dollar, and every hope. He had given her the land so she would be safe. He had written the letter so she would never have to wonder if the past would come for him. He had given her the ring so she would know that where violence used to live, love had taken its place. She looked up at him. Her vision was blurred. "You gave me everything," she whispered. She paused. Then she laid her hand on the oak table. Palm up, open. "But the only thing I ever needed on this table was your hand." Elias placed his hand in hers, scarred, calloused, cracked at the knuckles, his hand resting in hers. Her fingers, stained with charcoal and smudged with dust, closed around his. Morrison spoke first. Her voice was thick, broken. "We have been wrong about you, Mr. Stone, for years. God forgive us. We have been so wrong." Will Carson stepped forward and put his hand on Elias's shoulder. "Did not speak. Did not need to." Fletcher wiped her eyes. "This is one of the kindest things I've ever witnessed. Most thoughtful. You are a good man, Mr. Stone. Better than we knew. Better than we deserved to know." Clara and Elias stood in their cabin, hands joined over the table, and let the town see them. Not as the strange man and his pitied wife, as what they were. Two people who had been broken in different ways, and had put each other back together with patience and silence, and filled water buckets and wildflowers and drawings made from charcoal and love expressed through hammered nails instead of pretty words. 1 month later, the studio was rebuilt, not by Elias alone. Morrison brought curtains she had sewn from calico. Fletcher brought a cushioned chair. Yates donated 4 panes of glass from his own house. Carson hauled lumber on his dappled gray. Jack Dawson nailed the roof, steady and sure, earning his keep, and then some. The new studio was larger than the one the flood had taken. 16 windows, same as before, but the frame was stronger. The floor was raised on stone pilings so the water from the spring could run beneath without harm. The door had a brass handle that caught the morning sun. It was not one man's apology anymore. It was a whole town's. A letter arrived from Abilene the week before the studio was finished, written by Brennan's daughter because the old man's hands shook too badly to hold a pen. 4 sentences. "I remember that night different than you might think. I remember I had a whip and you did not. I remember you were a boy, and I was a grown man who should have known better. Consider the matter settled." Elias read it once, folded it, opened the wooden box, placed the letter inside next to his mother's ring. 2 letters now. One he had written, one he had received. Both acts of courage, both forms of grace. He closed the lid, set the box on the shelf in the studio, where the north light would fall across it every morning. That evening, Clara and Elias sat in the rocking chair under the oak tree. He had widened it 3 weeks ago, added a new seat plank and reinforced the frame so it would hold 2 people. The runners, the new ones he had carved from ash wood, moved smooth on the grass. 2 coffee cups sat on the flat rock beside them, his dented tin, her china cup with the floral pattern. Side by side, the way they sat every morning now at the kitchen table. Stars were coming out, one by one, then more, then the whole sky filling up with light. Clara had her drawing pad in her lap. She was not drawing the prairie tonight. She was drawing his hand, every scar, every callus, every crack and line and story written in the skin. She finished, tore the page carefully from the pad, stood up and walked inside, set the drawing on the shelf beside the wooden box. Next to it, leaning against the wall, a small, clumsy pencil sketch of a horse, the only drawing Elias had ever attempted, age 12, done in secret, hidden for 20 years because he was ashamed of how poor it was. 2 drawings side by side, one rough and honest, one skilled and tender, both true. She came back to the chair, sat against him, his arms settled around her shoulders, heavy and warm and certain. She rested her head in the hollow where his shoulder met his neck. It fit there perfectly, like the space had been made for her. The rocking chair creaked, the oak leaves shifted. Crickets started up. Somewhere far off, a coyote called and was answered by another. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked. "Tomorrow. I want to paint. Try the way the morning light hits the barn." "Sounds good. What about you?" "South fence still needs mending. Couple of posts are loose from the flood. I could help." "You could. Or you could paint. Either way is fine with me." Silence. The good kind. The kind that does not need filling. Clara closed her eyes, listened to his heartbeat under her cheek. Steady, strong, real. She thought about the first day. The wagon stopping, 30 feet of empty yard between her and a stranger with a scar. She thought about the water bucket filled every morning, the rocking chair repaired by a man who gave her the most sacred thing he owned, the wildflower on the armrest, the chicken that stole her biscuit and the laughter that broke something open between them, the wolf and the fever and the ride to town in the dark, the letter she burned, the box she watched him open, the fire, the water, the studio destroyed and rebuilt, and 3 things on a table that said everything a man could say without pretty words. "I see you. I trust you. I am yours." She had come to Kansas as a woman sold to settle a debt. She had arrived angry and proud and carrying someone else's letter in her pocket like a coward. She was none of those things now. Now she was a woman who had chosen to stay, who had learned that love did not always look the way you expected, that sometimes it looked like a filled water bucket and a repaired rocking chair and a studio with 16 windows built on a hill by a man who could not say "I love you," but could build it with his hands. The stars multiplied overhead. The Milky Way appeared, a river of light across the darkness. Elias's arm tightened around her shoulder. His hand rested there, gentle and sure, the way he did everything. The rocking chair held them both, steady, strong, built by his hands to last. Neither spoke. They did not need to.